When the reality hits, which is, in my case, this panic attack, it's like a forced moment, a pivotal change, a crisis. The reality of your lived experience is so shockingly out of line with this picture, it forces a giant reset. But critically in this model, if you think about the vision against the reality of your lived experience, what's in there and being shaken up is your belief system, your worldview about how you think things work for yourself and others around you.
Welcome to Future Fit Leadership, a podcast for leaders at every stage who want to stay relevant in a world that keeps changing. Leadership has shifted. The pace is faster, the expectations are higher, and the future is calling for a different kind of leader. One who is human-centered, grounded, and able to balance capability with empathy. These conversations bring together global perspectives on the skills and mindsets that help people and organizations thrive. Hello and welcome to Future Fit Leadership. I hope wherever you are listening to this podcast, you are well. It's the weekend. You're in Bunnings, somewhere many of us spend a lot of time, walking down the aisles, picking up the usual things you don't really plan to buy. It's nothing dramatic, and then something shifts. Your chest tightens, your breathing changes, your head starts to pound. You feel heat rise through your body, and in a matter of seconds, you're not sure what's happening or how to control it. That's where this conversation with Mark Jones begins, in a Bunnings aisle, in the middle of a panic attack he didn't see coming. But the signs were there. Persistent headaches, feeling off, carrying pressure from work, family, and a business that wasn't in a great place. But like most leaders, he kept moving. Coffee, stress, responsibility, rinse and repeat. Because stopping didn't feel like an option. And if we're honest, most of us perhaps know this pattern. And here's the thing. Those physical signals don't exist on their own. They often sit alongside a running commentary in your head, the quiet voice that says, "You're fine, just get through it today. You can't slow down right now." And over time, that voice becomes the decision maker. And so instead of responding to what your body is telling you, you override it. You normalize the pressure. You convince yourself this is just part of the job, until it isn't. Mark talks very openly about that internal narrative, the belief that he had to keep going, that stopping wasn't an option, and that how that story shaped every choice he made in the lead up to that moment in the Bunnings aisle. He also shares what changed for him in that moment, and it wasn't an overnight fix, rather just consistent, disciplined choices. Eating properly, sleeping properly, moving his body, and paying attention to the way he speaks to himself. Because the story you carry doesn't just reflect how you feel, it shapes what you do next. This is a very real conversation about pressure, burnout, and the signals most of us are trained to ignore. Please enjoy this critical, important conversation with Mark Jones. Hello, Mark Jones. Welcome to Future Fit Leadership. How are you today?
Thank you very much. I am fabulous, doing well.
That's good. Now, I'm going to get straight into our conversation because it's an important conversation, and our listeners will realize why as we go through it. But you were in Bunnings and you had a panic attack. What I'm interested in knowing before we talk about the actual panic attack, were there any signs or symptoms leading up to that moment that you ignored, that you probably should have paid more attention to?
I mean, plenty. And I think part of my story is a lack of self-awareness from a physical perspective. So, I think one of the humility moments for me was taking pride in being, this is a bit modest, but perhaps a little bit more emotionally intelligent than most blokes. But I had been experiencing persistent headaches and feeling, it's kind of weird to say, but like slightly dizzy and not quite yourself. When there's sort of times when you feel like, something's not quite right.
Yeah.
And at the time, because of the state that I was in terms of being stressed at work, feeling really overwhelmed by life in general, so wife, 4 children, big Sydney mortgage, a business that was really struggling, I had and carried a significant amount of stress. One of the challenges that you face in that situation, again, new to me, was that you're carrying this anxiety and stress to the point that it dulls your awareness of other things within your body. So that particular morning, I had woken up with a headache, and I thought my usual routine of coffee, possibly another one, can of Coke, Panadol, and Nurofen, and a lot of water, maybe that'll do the trick. Turns out it kind of did the opposite.
Isn't it funny? Like, because I think all of us in executive roles at some point make these decisions, and we're all pretty smart people, yet we ignore so many of the signs when we're under a lot of stress. And before we talk about exactly what the panic attack look like, do you think we do it because we so concerned or have this idea that our colleagues and work won't accept it and they see burnout as a dirty word?
Yes, I think there's still a lot of shame associated with it, which is that you can't cope, you haven't got what it takes.
Mm,
For me, it always has boiled down to a sense of I have to keep going. And in my case, if you're leading a small business of, 25, 30 people, there's a lot riding on your overall health. You don't see it in a responsibility sense, you see it in a weight. It's like a thing that you carry physically, emotionally, mentally. And so part of that is that you're not allowed to feel these things. So
mm,
and kind of gets through to the message that I share, and the big lesson for me that it probably took me quite a few years to understand, because we're talking, you know, 2019, so pre-COVID, just before COVID. The story you tell yourself when you're under pressure, that internal narrative actually directly informs and drives your behavior. So for me, that meant this can't be part of my experience. It's not who I am. And I have to keep going. Don't stop. Keep going, keep going, keep going. So when you're telling yourself that story, there's actually no permission to stop and reflect
mm.
before it's too late.
So you're in Bunnings. How are you feeling? What happened?
Yeah, aisle 10, Thornley, New South Wales. And I had this rising feeling of heat. Like when you get sort of stressed, um, chest really constricted, like I was short, panting breath. My head felt like it was like throbbing, and it felt like it was going to explode. And kind of embarrassingly, like I thought, if I having to go to the toilet at the same time, so you feel like your whole body's just about to sort of fall apart in lots of different directions. I remember putting my hand on the railing of the shelf, sort of thinking, This is not good." And I don't want to over dramatize it, but you got to understand, I'd never experienced
Mm,
anything like this. So I didn't have a frame of reference. I'd never talked to anyone about these types of symptoms. So I didn't have a way of normalizing it. And I just thought, am I about to faint or even possibly die here? And that idea flashed through my head. And then the second thought was, I can't allow myself to do that. I can't bear the shame and the attention and creating a
mm.
scene. I have to get out of here. So that kind of swirling sense of panic just kind of rose and rose and rose. All the emotions, the biological stuff, and the story in my head. It was honestly, it was frightening.
Did you collapse?
I didn't. What I did do, and I this is like with my kids saying, "Do what I say, don't do what I
Mm.
do."
Mhm.
I left my. I did an abandoned cart. I got in my car and drove home, and
No,
I really strongly recommend people not to do that,
no.
because I actually don't remember driving home. Like only barely. I remember sitting at the lights thinking, "Don't pass out, don't pass out." I got home, I burst through the door, virtually screaming, collapsed on a spare bed that was the closest one to the front door, and calling my wife's name, and she came and started attending to me. So after that, I passed out.
And then what happened after that? Did you end up in hospital and people talking to you about, you've got burnout, Mark, and you're going to have a lifestyle change and what was your experience post that and how well did you accept it?
Yeah, well, I didn't actually accept it. So that's part of my, personal growth and learning was that I had the benefit, and have the benefit of a wife who understands panic, depression, anxiety through her own journey, and she's done a lot of work in this space. And so I had the benefit of learning from her, actually, really just doing what I was told, let's be honest.
Mhm.
And it actually took me a long time to calm down, to really emotionally, mentally de-escalate. And I actually slept for like the best part of the next day. And then I had 2 weeks off work where I was resting and really not doing anything, could barely get out of bed. Went up and spent some time just to get away from the house and everything, with my parents on the Central Coast. And so I, slept in the spare room, and my mum looked after me again, which was kind of delightful looking back on, but actually, again, a really incredibly humbling moment. I remember sort of staring at the ceiling thinking, I'm back home again. Like, I've failed, how did I get here? I then began to start seeing medical professionals. I didn't go to hospital because I started to find myself in a relative state of regulation, but I knew that I was depressed. And actually, one of the things that many people who go through this experience is extreme sensitivity to light and sound. You don't like being in closed spaces. I found shopping centers brought on panic attacks and I had to get out, that sort of thing. But what I did do was go and see my GP, some days later, and he set me on a path of getting all the different supports that I needed. So I always recommend that to people is go see a GP. That's like number one, right? And you want to hope and pray you got a good one who
Mm,
understands. And I'll never forget what he said to me. Most blokes your age come to me after they've hit the tree, metaphorically speaking.
mm,
You've come to me just before, and I was kind of perversely encouraged because I thought, well, it can't be that bad. Like,
mm,
there's blokes worse than me. And then I had the second thought because, I've spent a long time as a journalist, which is like, hang on a minute, because you listen for little signals. And I said, what do you mean other blokes? Like, how many?
mm,
And that was the beginning of a broader journey where I started being more aware of the extent to which this is actually a crisis that we're experiencing around the world. So, two things started happening. I started getting lots of medical care and attention. And I think partly due to my makeup, I started taking notes, diarizing, and learning and trying to understand what the heck was going on in my life.
mm. What does self-care look like for you now? I mean, we're a number of years post that initial panic attack.
Yeah.
Have you had more since then, but you've been able to recognize what's happening to your body? And also, what does self-care look like for you now?
Yeah, so I haven't had a panic attack in a long time now, meaning like probably 2 years.
Hmm.
But in the time after, so for probably around 2 years, I would get them occasionally, and particularly in crowded spaces, shopping centers and the like that I mentioned. I'm glad you asked about self-care because it's something that I'm really, really passionate about. Because one of the hardest things that you face when you're experiencing stress or burnout or anxiety can often be this sense of losing control, like you have no agency anymore, like your body is conspiring against you, the world is conspiring against you, like what's happening to me right now? The three things that you can control and that I've actually spent years now really focusing on from a point of discipline is eating well, sleeping well, and exercising well. So I've got eating well. I'm at the gym. I've got a personal trainer. I exercise. I walk my dog 45 to hour and a half every single day. Sleeping well. I had sleep apnea, which was compounding a lot of problems. So I went and saw a sleep doctor and got all of that sorted and melatonin and other things to just sort of really get me back to 7 to 8 hours a night. So tick, and I've been really consistent with that. Sleeping well. What did I say? So eating, sleeping,
Exercising.
exercising, and the food side of things has really been about losing some weight at, as a byproduct of really being careful about the foods that I eat. And so that collectively has had an incredible difference. The naturopath as well, with realizing through blood tests that I was deficient in certain areas. One of the things that happens as part of this is your adrenal glands get
Mm,
overcooked, and
mm,
many other parts of your body. And so if you're permanently in fight flight response, your body really just can't hack it. So I've really had to dial back. Proud to say I'm down to one coffee a day. My naturopath wants me to have no coffee,
No
and I'm like, I'm
coffee.
sorry, but I can't. Well, there's going to have to draw a line here somewhere, right? So I'm down to one before I exercise. And then the last one, through my research, I talk about three pillars. Is the fourth pillar of self-care is
Mm,
self-talk.
mm,
Now, this is where we sort of start tapping into the storytelling mindset and where my expertise lies, which is that you are, I think as many of us would be aware, much better able to support all of those sorts of disciplines in the physical when you are working on the mental and really understanding when I'm under pressure, what do I say to myself? And also likewise when I'm at my best self, what's the actual internal narrative that I carry around?
mm.
And my big personal lesson that I share is that when you rewrite that internal narrative in a very honest, raw, authentic way, it actually changes, well, everything in your life. You're more able to look after your body in all of these different ways because it's a natural expression of your story. It's not something you're forcing yourself to do.
Mm.
And I went from feeling like I had no hope, meaning a mid 40s guy, the road's run out, it's all over. Like I've got nothing to look forward to, through to agency restored. And now I'm back to thinking 10, 15 years ahead and all that sort of wonderful dreaming. So
Yeah.
it's kind of big response right on the
Yeah.
self-care thing, but
Yeah.
it's actually become a way of me understanding myself and others in probably the truest holistic way that you could hope.
I'm going to stick with the self care for a little bit longer, Mark, because I think that executives, and I'm going to talk from personal experience myself, requires so much discipline. Like,
Mm,
you talked about eating, sleeping, exercising, and then the internal voice that we have. But all of that requires so much discipline.
yeah.
And that, and I've been guilty of it. I can't exercise today because I've got to prepare for a board meeting, and I can't exercise because I'm going to Sydney and I can't pack my gym shoes in my
Yeah.
bag because I want to carry hand luggage and I can't be bothered waiting for the thing to come out.
Yeah.
And then this year, I made a commitment to myself that I would start to meditate twice a day. And I went and did a full week course on meditation.
Yeah.
And I am now 2 weeks into it. And having the discipline to find two 15-minute segments a day in the morning and the afternoon, which isn't a lot in the grand scheme of things, right? It is amazing how the self-talk in my head tells me about all the other things that I should be doing rather than doing that.
And that's your inner critic. Part of the story for executives is firstly is being aware that we all have an inner critic,
Mm-hmm.
which is more profound and really deeply connected to our sense of identity and self than we give credit. And part of that's about who you are, who you're becoming. And if you have a positive view of that, it's going to have you set up better for success. Whereas if you have a profoundly negative view, I don't have what it takes, the classic imposter syndrome, I don't deserve this, or someone's going to find out that I'm not a good enough leader, that actually kind of leaches out into your disciplines on the negative side. So
Mm.
15 minutes suddenly feels a lot harder because it taps into this sense of, well, what's the point? And the way that I think about discipline now, and again through years of practice, is I think about it as I'm doing this activity so that I can. It's actually not about the activity itself. A little bit philosophical, but there's a slight detachment that I have to all of these activities because I'm more thinking about why I'm doing it and where I'm going, and I just see it as part of my day-to-day routine. Does that make
Yeah,
sense? So
no, but I like that. I'm doing this so I can,
yeah,
be a better partner, so I can sleep well, so I can live longer.
correct,
Three great reasons.
right? And if you're constantly telling yourself, this is great. I'm doing this so I can. And then what I've found actually is that the so I can becomes transformed into I'm really enjoying this. I'm enjoying how I'm becoming or what I'm becoming.
Mm.
And I'll give you a quick example is that my daily walk with my Bordoodle dog, Angel, because she is an angel, I've just come back this morning, 45 minutes with her. I get all sorts of time to myself that allows for processing, for reflection. It's actually kind of walking meditation to your point. And what I've started to do is actually look forward to the result of that. So the endorphins, I
Mm,
feel great, but I
mm,
also thrive on the ideas that come to mind as I allow the mind to wander.
mm.
And so you go from being like making yourself to, this is the classic journey of habits that you start to look forward to a new part of your lifestyle because your body is reminding you how good it is. So there's a tipping point that happens, and I don't know when. Like I think it's probably different for
For
all
everybody.
people,
Mm,
but it's where the habits become lifestyle, and really that's the goal. That's when
mm.
it becomes sustainable.
I like that. Some really, really good advice in there. Now, you talk about vision or reality gap and the space between how we think about life
Yeah.
should look and how it actually looks. So, firstly, talk about what that gap means and what does that gap do to people over time?
Yeah, so this works at two levels, personally and also in our work. So I have been fascinated by this actually for decades, and I first clocked into it, which was, and I'll give you the quick example. It was the early 2000s. I was working in San Francisco as a technology journalist, and this was the dot-com crash, and everything was falling apart. Companies falling up, being laid off or going out of business every day.
Mm, mm.
Our CEO stood up at the time and said, "It's going to be fine. I've seen these things before. They come and go. Just hang on there. The stock market's going to turn around and everything will go back to being fine and good as it was before." Now, don't tell that to a journalist who's talking to people all the time and analysts and
Yeah,
people that are getting laid off. And these things are more than cyclical, they're actually a long-term trend. And so the vision was everything's going to be okay. The reality was really quite distinct and a lot worse. At a personal level, we see that, which is I had a picture, I've got a vision for who I am and how I expect life to sort of shake out for me. And in my case, I had a picture in my head that it was constant growth, this sort of linear, bottom left to top right on the chart, right? That that economists and CFOs love is that we just constant
keep
progress. And
growing.
I, for many, many years didn't have any reason to think otherwise, married, children, business growing, no trauma to speak of. So you start to have this vision that this is how things will continue to play out. When the
Mm,
reality hits, which is in my case this panic attack, it's like a forced moment, a pivotal change, a crisis. The reality of your lived experience is so shockingly out of line with this picture, it forces a giant reset. But critically in this model, if you think about the vision against the reality of your lived experience, what's in there and being shaken up is your belief system, your worldview about how you think things work for yourself and others around you. And so this belief that I would always progress forward, that I wouldn't have any major challenges, was completely shaken up and forced me to really reevaluate. And we see this time and time again in our careers. As a leader or working, in any sort of management position, people will say things to you about either clients or customers or your boss about the picture of where things are and where they're going, and in your heart that's
no.
that's not true. Particularly Aussies, right? We're quite cynical.
Yes,
And
yes.
so, what it means is that we don't have the right stories in the middle there to support the vision. So, we haven't got an alignment between our lived experience, the reality, with the vision. The goal for yourself and in an organizational setting should always be working to alignment of those two things, where there's a vision that I believe in. I'm working towards that because I believe in it and I'm seeing the steps towards it. We haven't fully realized it yet, but I'm on board. And
Mm,
and that feeling when it sort of clicks and you're like, this is great. I'm loving this experience. I can see that the management is really supporting and behind what we're doing. We're getting the right feedback from clients. I feel good about this, right? That's the kind of, I think, a bit of a workplace nirvana that maybe we all secretly dream about.
mm.
But it's a really great way of understanding the difference between the stress when there's that gap versus when everything kind of clicks. And so that's a journey I invite people into. It's certainly one that I've worked really hard on myself.
Mm. And I'm going to assume that it's in the gap that the narratives of, I'm not good enough, I can't let people see me struggle, this isn't going to work,
Mm,
is where it kicks in. And if
yeah,
you can recognize it, if you've got the self-awareness to recognize that, where do
yeah.
you suggest leaders start to change that narrative?
There's a lot of things to do, and I'm always a holistic kind of thinker. I mean, aside from going and seeing your doctor, and you really do need to. Um, I think about it in like a bit of a three-legged stool analogy.
Mm,
So and I think about it as three things: grow, show, and know. So how well are you growing as a person? And that's this self-care that I'm speaking about. What do I actually know is my technical expertise, and am I aligned with, like, am I moving in that way? Am I developing in my profession? And then show is my ability to show up, right? To perform. You want all of these things kind of working in harmony, because that allows you, if you can imagine the seat on top of those legs is this self-talk, this narrative in your head. So there's a diagnostic there just which says you got to work out what's really fundamentally off kilter, so to speak, right? Is my personal growth and development really lacking? Is that leg a bit shorter than the other ones?
mm,
Or am I really finding myself struggling in my work? I'm way out of my depth, right? I need education or a mentor or something, right? Or am I coming at it from a performance perspective where the environment that I'm in, I'm not able to communicate clearly. I find myself overwhelmed. I can't really stand up and deliver. And I just like there's something kind of not right there. And that could be in a meeting. I think about this also as a speaker, right? My ability to get up on a stage and make the whole event sing. But that's just a picture for anyone to think about. What are the stages that you walk around on? So that's the first really quick diagnostic. And we can talk about the story code as well. So the book that I've written, I've actually got
mm. Yes, I'm going to ask you
um,
about that.
yeah,
Mm,
a whole process. But maybe before I do that, one of the things, like a quick, easy tool, I call this the mirror moment. So we've just had that little diagnostic. The mirror moment is, imagine yourself looking in a mirror, or if you're bold, look in the mirror, right? And what you want to do is actually name that secret negative inner voice. What is your inner critic saying to you right now? And I'm thinking about this is a trigger when you're in a moment of stress, right? Maybe there's a meeting coming up or some sort of event or a situation, and you're thinking, I'm screwed. I'm really cooked here. Like this is not going to go well. Like I'm not ready. I'm not prepared. Or maybe you want to actually say out loud, I haven't got what it takes, if that's the narrative. So step number one is actually naming that. Now, the mirror is saying, what is the exact opposite? So this is reversal thinking. And the exact opposite would be, I got what it takes. Like
mm,
this is going to be great. Now, where this differs from what I think of as bumper sticker thinking, which is, quaint, nice little happy thoughts, is take the extra step to think about your own experience in a situation similar to this and say, what stories from my own life are really true? So think about a situation that was similar to this where you've got this. So a meeting that was similar to this with the same type of client, it was a year ago. I got in there, I got up and I nailed it, right? The thing about our brains is that we're so wired biologically, as we know, to look for danger that we don't spend enough time remembering all the good stories.
mm.
So in a mirror moment, what you're doing is consciously reminding yourself you do have it, if that's the particular story. Because I remember that time I really, actually, that was all right. Like I did a pretty good job. And so here's the key. You're not lying to yourself,
Mm.
right? It's not clever, manifesting or,
Rah rah
allowing the
stuff that,
universe to sort of to
yeah.
trick yourself, because we can't lie to ourselves truly
Mm,
and honestly.
mm.
So that's what I love about the mirror moment. I practice this to this day myself. I remember staring down the barrel of a deadline last week thinking, I'm not going to make it. And I was like, hang on a minute. How many deadlines as a journalist have I completely nailed? Like, what are you talking about, Mark? Right? And it's that quick. So that's the mirror moment.
Yeah, I like that because you're not standing there going, I'm going to be awesome. This is going to be great. You're going to, kick it out of the park. no one's as good as you, because they're just words that you're telling your brain. Your brain isn't going to connect to that. But if you can relate it back to an actual event that happened where you did and you were awesome,
Yes.
your brain goes, yeah, I get that.
Yeah. And a lot of this is about claiming or reclaiming the agency that you've put down. And by
Mm,
that I mean really owning the idea that this narrative that steers how you behave on a day-to-day basis, this story in
mm,
your head, the stories we tell ourselves, it's 100% in your control.
mm,
If you are allowing, and there's plenty of motivational speakers and books out there that talk about this stuff, but it's very easy for us in the hard times when the pressure is on to believe the still, negative voice that's like,
mm,
you can't do
mm,
this.
mm.
What's remarkable to me too, because I work with mostly with corporates, senior executives. This is that inner critic doesn't discriminate at any
Mm.
level of the corporate hierarchy. In fact, the higher you get in the corporate hierarchy, the louder the
The
voice
louder
gets.
the
And
voice.
some of the, APAC wide global leaders that I know, it turns out they're still just human like the rest of us. And we're all in situations where we're doing things for the first time. It's a new situation, right? And what happens in this moment of like peak hyper awareness about, could this thing go wrong? Up pops the inner critic and says,
Yeah,
here we go again. You're
yeah,
screwed.
yeah, yeah.
Or whatever the story is. And so, yeah, I really want to encourage people to remind themselves that you have the ability to rewrite that narrative on the fly because it's you, it's your brain, it's your
Mm,
story that you are writing. No one else is doing it.
mm,
If you want to ingest to think about someone else's story and let that be yours, well, what you're doing is actually putting down your own ability to control your own mind. And
mm.
when you start to step further and further into that, um, it's honestly remarkable how exciting the new horizons become.
Mm. Now, and so based on all of these experience, you wrote a book called The Story Code for
Yes.
Leaders. Tell me
Yeah.
more about that.
Yes. So look, part of it's my own story to reflect the idea, as we've just discussed, about really wanting to normalize this experience. And then the second part of it, the code I developed is I looked at my own experience. I did a lot of research, of course, as a journalist, looked at all the peer-reviewed studies, and I wanted to understand how do we rewrite the stories we tell ourselves. And long story short, boiled it down to a four-step process, which is called, of course, the code. And C stands for challenge. And that stage is where we want to challenge this inner critic we've been talking about. And in the process of doing that, drown out our inner critic with what I call the inner coach. If you think about a soccer coach, they're like,
Mm,
yeah, you've got this. Do you remember like last season,
mm,
this is how it went? And you've done it before. So it's actually leaning into the positive stories and retraining your brain with these stories. Aligned with that is limiting beliefs that we're quite familiar with, is that I'm not the sort of person who can succeed, as a quick example. Reframing those as healthy beliefs. I'm on the journey to becoming, right? I have the ability to keep growing in this area. I know that if I keep going, I'll, etc. So challenging those limiting beliefs, the inner critic, that's the first stage. And it can take a while for some people to really become aware of how deeply felt and ingrained they are in our
mm,
sense of self. I always encourage people to do this in partnership with friends, with a counselor, with a therapist, with the right supports around you as well. I should say. So that's
mm,
C. Now the second one is overwrite, and overwrite is actually where you're choosing to lean into those positive narratives, the inner coach, the healthy beliefs. And what's different about this from a storytelling perspective is looking at the concept of archetypes or story characters. And we won't go into all of them, but you'd be familiar just from movies and books,
mm,
right? That you've got the
mm,
hero, the protagonist, you've got the villain. There's all sorts of character types that we can play. And when you start to think about how that starts to inform your personal narrative, you're like, hang on a minute, I've been casting myself as the villain in a story that's going nowhere. And maybe, you actually see your life as a tragedy, just to be a bit dramatic, meaning this is going nowhere, right? Or maybe you see yourself as the hero in a success story, but the hero, you're really struggling with the fact that they're experiencing a moment of crisis. What does the hero do? Well, they look to their mentor. They look to their friends around them who, help them through the journey. And we all know in the successful stories, this is, the hero's journey from Joseph Campbell to Monomyth, right? We all know that there's a moment of crisis where we think the hero is really not going to make it.
Mm.
But what happens in the movie? Well, the hero, with the help of his friends, gets through that crisis and recovers, right? And then moves into a growth phase. And so overriding is actually about taking the time to understand who you are, how you're sitting within your own story that you've been subconsciously constructing for yourself and getting that awareness. That particular stage is enormously powerful because you get this clarity of like, oh my gosh, I actually have been living in this kind of victim mentality, tragedy mindset that's been infecting everything, right? And I've seen this many, many times in people that I've worked with. So that's the second stage. Now the decide is D for decide. This is really important because you need to draw a line in the sand at some point to say,
Mm.
in very simplistic terms, I have an old story, an old narrative, and I've now really understood what this old narrative is. I'm going to make a commitment to myself. Maybe you want to broaden that out to significant other and friends, maybe working with your therapist, which is what I did, right? I'm going to make a decision to move towards this new, healthier version of myself.
Mm.
And part of that in enabling that decision is making some very conscious choices about the people you associate with, the sort of story that you're going to keep telling yourself. And this is writing it out, speaking it out, really consciously moving towards a new story. So, what is that story? The thing I love about optimism, I've always loved the concept of I used to be an optimist. Part of my crisis was why am I not optimistic anymore? My identity is lost, right?
Mm.
Reclaiming that optimism. Optimism says, yes, it's hard. Of course, life is hard. I'm not, all sort of rose colored glasses about this. But what I do know is that it is possible that I can go forward in this way. So you're committing yourself in that decision stage to the clarity around the news story and how you're going to move forward. And then the very last part of it, I'm all about sustainability, not just environmentally, but from a life perspective. And as we've been touching on, the self-talk is the key to a sustainable life across all of those different areas of self-care we were talking about. So the encoding stage really, this is a nice full circle to the beginning of our conversation, which
Mm.
is what are the day-to-day habits that I know I can sustain? I can sustain a walk with the dog. I can sustain healthy food choices because it's within my control. I can sustain healthy sleeping because that's again within my control. I can sustain this new narrative through the different journaling that I'm going to do, through the various therapies and other inputs that I'm going to get. And I'm going to make a decision, whatever my set of new emerging habits are going to be, I'm going to start looking at different ways of encoding that into my life. And so the commitment there is it's easy to just, again, put a bumper sticker on your car and say, I believe in happy endings. That actually doesn't help you get the happy ending, right?
No,
You forget
no.
about it. What you want to do is at your own pace, at a level that you're comfortable with, don't overcommit, start to introduce these little habits into your life that I think of as encoding because again, like when these become a natural part of the way that you live, honestly, it transforms the way that you think and feel and behave and then and show up in the world. So that's the code process.
Mm. And I'm assuming that the book really delves into not just your experience, but some of the things that leaders can look at doing to avoid the burnout and to avoid the absolute breakdown.
Yeah, correct. It actually talks through in detail how to do that.
Yeah, great.
And
Sounds
and
like a
so
book every leader in Australia should be getting, Mark.
thank you. I appreciate that. Obviously, that's my hope that they do. And I've had some really wonderful feedback from people. What I do say is that this is not an overnight fix.
Mm.
And I think it's the truest form of professional development is to commit yourself to change over time. When we try to do a quick fix like an
Mm.
intensive diet, to use that as an example, we all know that you bounce back to the weight that you had before. If you
They're
haven't
in,
encoded, these new habits into your lifestyle. And so, yeah, the story code is actually about what is this new transformational way of living that I want to start working towards. And so that was why I
mm.
really invested in detailing out the system.
Mm. I think one of the things I've learned is, and it was the last point you made, was it has to be sustainable, because if
Mm.
it's not sustainable, you'll do it for a week. It's like, we all write down a goal at the start of the year and say, I
Yeah.
want to lose 5 kilos. Well, how are you going to sustain that, to actually do that on an ongoing basis?
Yeah.
And, I've really changed my mindset around
Yeah.
how I
And
have these.
yeah, and look, can I be honest too? Just a really practical example about things that you can do. Once a week, I do what I call a clarity break. And I learned this from a business operating system called the Entrepreneur's Operating System, or EOS. And they teach this idea of a clarity break. And it's once a week, and I make a commitment. It's in my diary, and I go up to the cafe, and I ask myself, what's working? What's not working, and what am I going to do next? Very simple. And in the not working, so what's working is just think about your whole life, everything in your life that's working, and be thankful for it. Write it all down. What's not working? You know what's not working? The gym. And I had this moment of like, the gym, when I turn up, right, I've got all this stuff going on my head, and I've got to think about my exercise routine. What am I going to do? Like, I don't
Mm,
understand. Like, I'm not a gym guy where it's all like, I just got really frustrated because I didn't know how to use the equipment. So
mm,
I thought of that as like you would a business problem. So what's the problem here? The problem is my mental capacity, like the my mental availability and my emotional availability for this is very low, right?
mm,
I'm overcooked, but I do need help and I wanted it. So what did I do? I went to a gym that's got personal training and I can just turn up, and yes, it cost me just a bit more, but I've been able to sustain that because I turn up without having to have this mental overhead. And so that was a solution to all of these little tiny issues that we carry around on a day-to-day basis. It
mm.
might be like the idea of going shopping for 2 hours through Woolies or Coles, like just fills you with dread. Well, can you set up like an online ordering system, or can someone else in the family do it? Or like,
Mm,
what are these things that actually, at a very mundane level, in aggregate over time become unsustainable, and you know that it's holding you back. We don't actually apply our business lens to parts of our own life in a very consistent way. And
yeah.
so that's why the clarity break has been so important for me, because I was like, okay, what am I going to do next? I'm going to have a chat to my wife about this gym thing. Like, can we spend an extra $20 a week for me to go and get a bit more than $20 a week to get a professional trainer, if that's my solution to what I think is going to, work, and then move forward in that way. And so,
Mm.
hopefully that's encouraging. Right? You got to start picking off all this stuff that is causing friction, is slowing you down, and is holding you back. So, don't just sit there and whinge about it. Like,
No, do
do
something,
something.
and do it in bite-sized pieces is what I'm hearing as well. Because if you do it, try and do too much at the one time, you'll overwhelm yourself and then you'll
Yeah.
stop doing it.
Yep.
Again, it's not sustainable
Yep.
habits. Yeah. One last question before we move on to our spotlight shuffle piece, which we do with all of our guests.
Yeah.
The world that leaders are working in at the moment is very fast paced. There's a lot of changes. There's a lot of, you look at it from a global perspective right down to a local perspective in
Mm.
Australia. And my concern is that between now and the next 4 to 5 years, I think we're going to find a lot of leaders are either burning out or opting out. They're
Mm.
going and doing something else. If
Yeah.
you had one piece of advice to give to leaders so that they avoided that, what would it be?
Look after yourself. Honestly, it's a marathon, not a sprint,
Mm,
and give yourself permission to not be okay. We
mm,
already know that half of the working population in Australia, and in fact globally, that's the stats from the Gallup survey in July last year, that around 48% of the global workforce is already burnt out. In Australia, at executive levels in 2025, it was sort of around the 60%. So we're actually carrying, as a working community, a level of underlying stress and burnout. I think of it as functional burnout, right? I haven't actually hit the metaphorical tree yet,
yeah.
but geez, I'm skidding all over the place, aren't I?
Yeah.
It's actually giving yourself permission to take stock, to choose to slow down a little and really analyze honestly, how am I doing? And it's easy for me to say that. I mean, I've done it myself, so I guess I can say it with some degree of certainty.
Mm,
But the thing to also remember is you got to push through the awkwardness. We talk a lot about vulnerability and courage. It's not easy, right?
no.
I don't like going to the dentist. I don't like getting my blood taken. Like, these are things that are good for you, the encouragement I have is do it anyway.
Yeah.
Just do
Yeah.
it anyway. And you have to push yourself. Isn't that adulting, by the way?
It
I
is
heard that a long
adulting.
time ago.
It is
Adulting is
adulting.
doing the things you don't want to
You
do
don't want to
because no
do.
one else is going to make you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you really do have a choice, fork in the road. You can choose to ignore this, and it's almost certain that you're going to run off the road.
Mm,
Or you can choose to pay attention to what your body, your mind, your heart, your soul, spirit is telling you. There's a great book, The Body Keeps Score, right? Your
mm.
body, biologically, this stress, these toxins do build up. I didn't believe that, right? It's a bit like Star Wars, where they didn't believe the Force, and Han Solo says it's true, all of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Bunnings
And
made you believe it, all right.
right, and so maybe just consider me your happy conscience,
Mm,
warning you to take stock,
mm.
do something about it.
Good advice. Now, we're going to play the Spotlight Shuffle, which is you get to pick a number, any number between 1 and 20, and randomly we've got questions against those numbers, and I'll ask you the question. So, what's your first number?
7, is that what everyone says?
Seven's quite popular, actually. What's
Yeah.
the hardest part of leadership no one talks about?
It's remarkably lonely at times. And by that I mean people don't know how it feels.
Mm,
If you're in upper leadership, yeah, there can be this idea, oh yeah, I know how you feel. No, you don't.
mm, mm.
And then you think you're not allowed to have those feelings as well. So there's sort of a guilt complex that comes with the sense of being a little bit out on your own.
That's the most common answer I get out of everyone I speak to is the fact that it is lonely in leadership. And it's such a shame because we've been saying that for years and years and years, and yet we don't seem to have found a way to make it less lonely.
Yeah. I mean, there's plenty of things you can do. There's all sorts of organizations
Mm.
and things you can do.
Having a mentor, having a tribe, are just some small things that you can do around that as well, isn't
Yeah,
it? So, yeah.
yeah, correct. We talk about having a friend in the office. Doesn't have to be your
Mm,
bestie, but just a very simple practical thing is that I've always, even as a business owner, had friends in the company.
mm,
They can't know and directly empathize with every part of your experience. Having someone that you can share a bit of stupid banter with
yeah,
and have some fun, just kind of,
makes a
you know,
difference.
yeah, on a day-to-day basis. Yeah.
Mm. All right, next number.
Well, let's go with 19.
What's the biggest leadership myth you've had to unlearn in your career?
Oh, yes. Okay. So the myth is that you have to be qualified in every aspect of business and life in order to be a CEO.
Ah, yes, that old chestnut.
It's this idea that you sort of wake up one day and it's like, how did I get here? Like, what
Mm,
did I, do I deserve this? Is this like, yeah, and so that's the self-doubt inner
yeah.
critic talking. And of course, the real answer is I actually have what it takes. And I have the ability to bring around me the right people to support me in the areas where I'm not strong.
Hmm.
And that's part of leadership, not a personal failure.
All right, one last question.
Let's go at the other end. I'll say 3.
Three. Okay. What's the most exciting possibility you see in the future of leadership or work? Good one to finish off with.
The most exciting, this is like my son is like, what's your favorite food in the whole
And the whole
world?
world.
Yeah. Okay. The most exciting thing for the future of leadership. I'll tell you this. I think this is the year of celebrating our humanity, being real people who are honest about how they're doing. And the reason why that is exciting to me is that that's the beginning of breakthrough, for personal growth and for company growth. We
Mm,
have for the longest time believe this stupid myth that companies are faceless entities that must be served to our own personal detriment. But in truth, business has to serve us as people. If it doesn't serve the people internally and externally, it's failing. That, of course, is we could get on a whole big thing about capitalism, but this is one of the failures of the mainstream way of thinking about business, which is that it has to be people and profit. And
mm,
so this discovery in it's actually just a reawakening of this idea that honesty about the real lived experience of work and leadership at any stage, at any level, is the beginning of living consistently in a different way. So I get excited when people talk about loving events again, about the value of being connected in
mm,
different spaces, learning how to communicate in different ways, and letting that become part of proper grown-up business strategy. To me, that's the business right there. That's where you get everything firing.
Mark, thank you for being on the podcast. Thank you for sharing your story. It is so important because I think that a lot of us in executive roles go through a number of things that you've spoken about. And hopefully, this conversation and your book gives people the tools to actually navigate that journey for themselves. So, thank you.
No, it's a pleasure. Thanks very much for having me.
If you like what you've heard, please share, rate, and review this podcast. And don't forget to share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing it. The producer of Future Fit Leadership is Maritza Barone from Guide Your Light Network. If you would like to reach out to me, please DM me on any of my social media platforms. I'm available for speaking at conferences or consulting to your business. Future Fit is created in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives. If you'd like to join the community and receive a free takeaway each week, sign up to the Future Exchange app in my show notes. Thank you for having me in your space. This is a Guide Your Light Network production, creating podcasts with purpose.